Hey King, thanks for clicking on the video. I'm Cody B, and in today's video we're going to be going back in time to a handful of historical events and ask ourselves the question, what was Chris Chan doing during this event or the anniversary of it? For better or worse, Chris Chan is one of, if not the most documented person in all of human history. The Chris Chan Wiki, or the Quickie, is an incredibly expansive and comprehensive list that documents basically every single action that Chris has ever made and organizes it by the day. Something I've personally found to be pretty entertaining was to look up my birthday and see the kinds of things that Chris had gotten up to on that day throughout the years. So I decided to keep doing that, but expand my horizons to significant historical events and share my findings with all of you. Now I will say there are some gaps in the Quickie, so there may be times where we will need to look at the same date in a different year. We will also be doing this for any historical event that takes place before Chris was alive and or on the internet. One last thing before we get into this, I will not be getting political about any of the historical events in this video or any other in the future. I just don't want to get bogged down by any of that, so we will just give a brief description of the event and then get into what Chris did. So now let's jump into the most recent event in this video, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. On February 24th of 2022, Russian forces crossed the border with their neighboring country, Ukraine. Tensions between the two nations had been steadily rising for quite some time leading up to the full invasion. In fact, there had already been fighting going on in Ukraine since 2014 as Russian-backed separatists in the republics of Donetsk and Luhansk had been waging a civil war. It was actually these separatists that Russian President Vladimir Putin intended to support with the invasion, or special military operation as he referred to it. There was also the fear of Ukraine joining the NATO alliance, something that Russia is incredibly opposed to. But regardless of the reasons, Russian tanks, aircraft, and men were now in Ukraine. The Ukrainians would receive military support from the Western world in the form of munitions, food, and other supplies like that. Even though the Russians gained a lot of ground in the very beginning of the war, it has now devolved into a sort of stalemate. Although Ukraine is slowly being worn down and giving up ground, as even with the material aid, the Russian forces are simply larger and just have more resources to throw at the conflict. But that is not to say that it has been easy for Russia by any means. Both sides are suffering greatly, and all we can hope for is a quick end to this conflict that has been the most costly conflict seen in Europe since the Second World War. Now, as far as Chris Chan is concerned, I am sure all of the seasoned Christorians already knew this, but I was completely blindsided by the fact that February 24th is Chris Chan's birthday. That's right, the deadliest and still ongoing as of this recording conflict in Europe since the Second World War started on Chris Chan's birthday. Now, this was a very uneventful birthday for Chris, turning 40 within the walls of the Central Virginia Regional Jail, awaiting trial for evolving Barb from mere mother to lover. I just find this fascinating because Chris claims to be holier than thou, going as far as to claim to be the second coming of Jesus Christ, in fact, which, by the way, infuriates me because how dare anyone, but especially Chris Chan, claim to be Jesus, the Messiah, the savior of humanity. It's absolutely disgusting. But yet, this terrible conflict started on Chris's birthday. It's absolutely a coincidence, but it's just kind of interesting to see how this lined up. Our next historical event is the assassination of Osama bin Laden by SEAL Team 6. This took place on May 2nd of 2011. Osama bin Laden is quite possibly the most infamous terrorist of all time. He was at the very top of the United States Most Wanted list for roughly 15 years due to his terrorist activities that included founding the militant group Al-Qaeda. He was involved in attacks on U.S. embassies in East Africa during the late 90s, and of course he was one of the main architects of the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center in New York City. Bin Laden would be able to evade capture by the United States for so long due to having an incredibly strong support structure that aided in keeping him concealed, along with not staying in one place. The night bin Laden was killed, he was in Pakistan, a country that the United States wasn't at war in, unlike Iraq or Afghanistan. United States Special Forces SEAL Team 6 would fly into bin Laden's compound under the cover of night, and with surgical precision, they would eliminate his guards and, of course, bin Laden himself. They would recover his body and it would be brought back to the USS Carl Vinson, where they would indeed verify that it was bin Laden, after which they would bury him at sea in the North Arabian Sea, keeping within the bounds of Islamic customs. While all of this stuff was going down in the Middle East, Chris was accusing a sweetheart/troll named Jackie of leaking Chris's Tom Girl photos. Chris would use the front-facing camera of a Nintendo DSi or a 3DS to take several photos in makeup and women's clothing while trying to strike some suggestive poses. This was the first time Chris had ever done any kind of gender bending and was quite embarrassed that these photos had somehow gotten into the hands of the trolls. It's believed that Chris took these photos due to being told that Chris needed to be more in touch with the feminine side, or that Chris should pursue being a tomgirl because being a guy was too hard. I personally find either one a viable explanation for why Chris would take these photos, but Chris was quite upset with Jackie for allegedly releasing these private photos that were sent to her in an attempt to win her over, turning her into Chris's girlfriend. Needless to say, she would not become Chris's girlfriend, but Jackie would eventually be able to talk Chris down and maintain a trolling relationship with Chris for a while, but she would eventually exit the verse not long after Chris's father Bob passed away, feeling it was too immoral to continue to troll Chris while grieving Bob. Our next historical event is a much less heavy one than the last two, but one that is very important to me personally, that being the release of the very first Gears of War game, which took place on November 7th of 2006. Now, as you can probably tell based on the gameplay in this video and a majority of my other content, I am a massive Gears of War fan. It is by far my favorite PvP multiplayer experience. The PvE mode, known as Horde, that got added in Gears of War 2 is fantastic as well, not even to mention the phenomenal story that was told in the original trilogy, novels, and comics. I'll even go ahead and say that I don't completely hate the story of the newer games of 4 or 5 and the spin-off game Gears Tactics, but they are significantly worse than the original trilogy. All the way back in 2006, however, the original Gears of War was revolutionary. From a graphical perspective, nothing else really came all that close. In fact, Gears of War is the reason that the Xbox 360 had 512 megabytes of RAM compared to the 256 megabytes that the main competitor PlayStation 3 had, which is insanely low nowadays, but you gotta remember 2006 was 19 years ago. The gameplay in Gears of War is also incredibly unique. Nothing quite like it has ever released before, and even to this day, nothing quite like it has released since. This has led to Gears having a devoted and passionate fan base, but it has also put a bit of a ceiling on the heights that the series could reach with long-term popularity due to the very steep learning curve and massive skill gap between good players and the new ones in the PvP. But hopefully now with Gears of War making its way over to PlayStation along with PC and Xbox with the release of Gears of War Reloaded, a remaster of the original 2006 Gears of War, along with the subsequent release of a prequel game called Gears of War E-Day, the community can grow and thrive. Chris had a bit of a busy day all the way back on November 7th of 2006, releasing a video directed at the authors of Chris's Encyclopedia Dramatica article. Chris went over some family and personal history to give them a better idea of Chris's true character.
Hello, my name is Christian Weston Chandler from Rutgers, Virginia. It has come to my attention that I have a lot more fans of my Electric Hedgehog Pokemon Saichu than I had originally thought. And I thank each and every one of you for your support. And I will draw more comics when I get some positive inspiration or when I feel like it. After all, everybody has a life, so do I. I have a life. Anyway, it has also come to my attention that I have a lot of people who may have picked up on the wrong theories of my person. I will not quote any hate sites, but I would like to humbly apologize for appearing to be some kind of sleaze, troll, badass, or whatever adjectives, good or explicit, you may feel about me. Please understand, I am a 25-year-old high-functioning autistic male with a simple, peaceful dream of becoming a father of a sweet, little pretty girl who I will doubly name Crystal Weston Chandler. Crystal, a name that sounds similar to mine, but it has a nice ring to it, and it's also similar to the illustrious metal that is mined from the Earth's ground. Weston, my mother's maiden name, and a proper English name from royal descent. As a matter of fact, among my mother's side in the ancestral traits, we have been traced down to Daniel Weston, who was on the Mayflower voyage, and beyond him, Anne Boleyn, who was the one of King Henry VIII's wives, who gave birth to Queen Elizabeth I. And Chandler, the family name my father had. And from his line, from his side of the family, we have the Cherokee blood. I'm 1/16. And from among us Cherokees, there are very few of us left because we were big in number, but then came along the forced march on the Trail of Tears. Well, some of us went into hiding. Yeah, short line there, Cherokees. We're a respected tribe. We should be respected anyway, even though we were forced into the Trail of Tears. But that's another whole nother story. You can go read. You can learn about in your local libraries.
There's a lot going on in that clip for sure, so let's break it down. Those dramatic inhales or breaths that Chris kept taking were funny but distracting. My guess is that this was a variation of the stress sighs that Chris does regularly. Clearly this article was getting under Chris's skin. In Chris's short list of wrong theories of his person, only one of them is something that Chris has ever been accused of, that being Chris is a sleazy sexual pest, which is a verified, true, and honest statement about Chris. Besides that, not a single person has ever mistaken Chris for being a troll or a badass. I'm also quite happy to report that Chris will likely never have the opportunity to subject a child to being parented by Chris Chan, but it is interesting to see just how long Chris has wanted this daughter named Crystal. Also, crystals aren't made of metal, by the way. I do actually appreciate the history lesson on the lineage of Mother Barb and Father Bob. I have no idea if Chris is telling the truth about any of this, but it's absolutely hilarious to see the downfall of this bloodline going from apparently royalty to Chris. The 1/16th Cherokee is incredibly entertaining as well. Chris referring to the Cherokees as us, as if he is a part of that group whatsoever, is great.
And I was born in 1982. They gave me the birth then, and anyway, there was so nice of them for them to give me the birth during the early 1980s. I was diagnosed with high-functional autism, and I lived a somewhat rough life. I've had an abusive babysitter at one time. And some of the teachers and principals of Nathaniel Green Elementary School, and I was attending in later years, about late 1980s, early 1990s, they abused me. They abused me by pinning me to the ground with their hand, holding my wrists and my ankles, pinning me down to the ground, and audio taping my cries and shouts.
I will say, if that is true and the teachers actually did that to Chris, that is awful, and I honestly can't think of a worse way to handle an autistic child. But the 80s was a practically different universe at this point, so who knows. I wouldn't exactly call Chris a reliable narrator, however.
And after being on honor roll throughout Providence Middle and Manchester High, Science U was first thought up in my senior year in math, along with nice bunch of teachers backing me up in my circle of gal pals. I mostly had that circle during my high school years. Anyway, after all that, I graduated. Then we moved back to our old home in Ruckersville, where I attended Piedmont, Virginia Community College, and eventually I graduated from there too with a degree in computer-aided drafting and design, also known as CAD/CAM. And during my high school years, I was used to being surrounded by girls in my circle. And after having to lead them, I felt ever so lonesome. And after the stress from some of the people at PVCC, as well as my mental block of autism, it became hard for me to approach the girls like I used to. And I would like to point out right now, during my whole sweetheart search was started when I turned 21 on February 24th, 2002. Anyway, beyond that date, I never have stalked anybody. Never have stalked. I'm telling you right now. All I did was sit around with a sign by my side that said I was looking for a boyfriend-free girl, 1825, yada yada yada.
I'm going to be honest, I'm fairly new to the depths of the Chris Chan story. I know a lot of the main bullet points, but some of the finer details I am just learning for the first time in this video. The main thing that stood out to me in that clip was Chris's insistence that he had never stalked anyone. To me, that says that Chris probably did stalk someone, or at the very least didn't respect the boundaries of some poor woman who was around Chris for an extended period of time. But I do know a bit about Chris's love quest sign. My favorite part is about how he specified that he was in search of a white woman exclusively, so no other races need apply.
I have feared rejection and the infinitely high boyfriend factor because you cannot tell which ladies are paired up and which are not. And wedding rings, that's just a whole different story because they're married. Because it's not like you give every woman a ring who's already paired up. This is one perspective. But anyway, I do not move from my seat at all unless I need to go use the restroom. That's it. Okay? I never move from my seat while I'm sitting around waiting for the girl to come to me. Because that's all I'm doing there. I'll just wait for a girl to come talk to me. Because, like I said, I'm afraid to approach him at that point. So please understand, I am not a violent person. I'm decent. I come from a caring, loving pair of parents. I'm kind. I'm considerate. I will respect your space and your feelings ever so much. And I apologize for my MySpace profile if it appears to reflect anything on the contrary of all that. I apologize that I appear to be a slow-minded person. I'm sorry for reflecting any negative feelings towards each of you that have felt them, including those who have had such feelings they have created demeaning web pages. All I ask of those people who are watching this right now is just take them down, please. I'm asking, as an innocent victim of misunderstanding, just take down your web pages or add them to positively better reflect my feelings as an individual, as a person, as a man who has suffered like most everybody in this world that we all live in. Thank you very much for your time and listening, and please remember, I'm an innocent person, just like most every one of you. I've had my faults. I've had my share of bad times. I have my share of good times. Please understand that. Thank you again. Take care.
Unsurprisingly, this plea to the authors of the article would fall on deaf ears, and Chris would continue to be plagued by the trolls. It was also on this day that Chris's correspondence with someone named Vivian came to an end, as Vivian asked Chris to throw away the Sonichu medallion. This is after the day before Vivian told Chris via email that Chris is responsible for having a bad life, and she also said that Chris should fuck off and die, which is pretty intense. Keeping with video game media, I figured we would cover one that pertains a bit more to Chris, that being the release of Sonic Heroes, the only Sonic game that I have ever actually played as a kid. It released on December 30th of 2003. Now, I said that this is the only Sonic game that I have ever played, and that is true as far as official Sonic releases go. I have a small confession, that being that at one point I almost became a Sonic kid. See, before I had consistent access to any game console, my family did have a PS2 when I was young, but as the youngest brother, I didn't get a whole lot of time on it, so I would often play flash games on the family computer instead. On whatever website I was on, I don't remember exactly what it was, there was a turn-based RPG style Sonic game that I played regularly. I don't remember a whole lot about this game except that it was edgy as all hell, and there was a big boss at the end of the game that I'm pretty sure was impossible to beat because a cutscene would play after you lost. I know it's not much to go on, but this had to have been anywhere from 2006 to 2009, I think, so if anyone else has a blurry memory of playing something like that as a kid or happens to know exactly what I'm talking about, let me know. But I say all of this to illustrate that I had a much different idea of what Sonic was as a kid due to this flash game, so when I was at a rummage sale with my mom and I seen Sonic Heroes for sale for $1, I asked her for it and she got it for me. I was slightly confused by the game because it wasn't turn-based and didn't have blood all over the place, but I still had fun with it, although I did never actually complete it as a kid. I still do have it, so maybe someday I'll play and complete it. But some interesting facts about this game was that it was the first official Sonic game to not exclusively release on a Sega console. It did receive mixed reviews, but it seems to be generally considered as a decent Sonic game with a few flaws. So now let's see what Chris was up to. This is an example of where we don't have a record of what Chris was doing on that exact day, unfortunately. So going forward in time year by year until we find an entry for the anniversary of this date brings us to December 30th of 2007. The Quickie has noted 2 events that took place on this day. First, Chris would create a new account for ED, short for Encyclopedia Dramatica, called Christian. Chris would use this account to, quote, vandalize ED. Now, Chris had been attempting to edit the article made on him in previous days to make it more favorable, but Chris's efforts had been thwarted and things continued in that manner for quite some time. The other thing that Chris did this day was write a poem titled For My True Love, I Would. Chris would send this poem to Sweet Angel Vanessa 162 on the 31st of December, but the poem was written on the 30th. So I'll now read the poem to you verbatim. For my true love, I'd treat her tenderly, sweetly, gently, like a summer breeze. I'd caress her skin gently with my strong fingers. I'd take her to eat and provide for her to my ability. I'd start small at McDonald's, then let it get better in due time. When the mood is right, I'd whisk her up in my arms and lift her up in sweet gentleness. I would share with her the best kiss of my life, and hopefully hers, since it would be the first of my life. I would do for her as much as I am able in getting her the she desires. Every day I would try to make her smile with a jest, a spark, or tender message. If she is willing to allow the pleasure, I'd lay her down, caress her gently, tickle her fancy, have her tickle my fancy, and give it to her with all of the learned, lonely experience I've endured. But I digress on that. Most importantly, I would hang on to her every word of her life tales, her feelings, her troubled times, and share my condolences accordingly. And I can hope that she would be willing to do the same for me. I am nothing without this woman, so I hope and pray that she will stay to love me for me, as I would stay with her for her. I love you would be shared daily with a French side dish. J, I am her soldier, to do for her as she sees fit. Signed, Christian Weston Chandler. Now that may be one of the worst poems ever written. It had little to no structure or flow or anything really, so it's no surprise that this wasn't the thing to secure Chris a boyfriend-free girl. For our final historical event of this video, I decided to go back to something a bit depressing and take a look at Hurricane Katrina, which made its landfall on August 29th of 2005. The devastation that the storm brought was widespread, hitting all over the southern United States, Bahamas, Cuba, and even extended up into eastern Canada. The city of New Orleans was seemingly hit the hardest as the city was plunged into complete chaos in the aftermath due to the city's levee system failing, being overwhelmed by the volume of water, resulting in catastrophic flooding taking place within the city. There are some truly harrowing stories that come from the survivors of the storm, and there was also a great deal of criticism directed towards the at the time President George Bush, who people felt was acting inadequately to provide aid to those affected by the storm. In total, 1,392 people would lose their lives, and the storm would cause $125 billion in damages, which would equal $205,750,768,049.16 in 2025 money. On the exact date of the hurricane, there is only one noted event that took place. Chris sent an email to a girl named Lindsay. I'm assuming that's how it's pronounced, but the way it's spelled is Lindsay. In the email, Chris detailed his class schedule and stated that he was hoping to meet up with Lindsay soon. Now, Lindsay was a fellow student at the community college that Chris went to, abbreviated to PVCC. Their correspondence began due to Chris being on the hunt for a boyfriend-free girl. They would chat on MySpace for a while, but would never end up meeting, with the two of them never seeming to be able to get their schedules to line up. My personal thought is that Lindsay was just being nice to Chris because she could tell that Chris was, well, Chris, and didn't want to be mean to someone like that, but it's for the best that she had such limited contact with him. So that's going to be it for this first look into Christory. I hope you enjoyed it. If this is well liked, we can take a look at some other historical events and line them up with Chris. So by all means, if there is a particular event that you would like to see in the future, let me know. But with that said, I hope you have a blessed day and peace out.